Whenever affection or eros is one's theme, one finds a prepared audience. The importance and beauty of both have been stressed and almost exaggerated again and again. In fact, I don't need this. Even those who would debunk them are in conscious reaction against this laudatory tradition and, to that extent, influenced by it. But very few modern people think friendship a love of comparable value or even a love at all. I cannot remember that any poem since In Memoriam or any novel has celebrated it. Tristan and Isolde, Antony and Cleopatra, Romeo and Juliet have innumerable counterparts in modern literature. David and Jonathan, Pylades and Orestes, Roland and Oliver, Amis and Emile have not. To the ancients, friendship seemed the happiest and most fully human of all loves, the crown of life and the school of virtue. The modern world, in comparison, ignores it. We admit, of course, that besides a wife and family, a man needs a few friends. But the very tone of the admission and the sort of acquaintanceships which those would make it would describe as friendships show clearly that what they are talking about has very little to do with that philia which Aristotle classified among the virtues, or that amicitia on which Cicero wrote a book. It is something quite marginal, not a main course in life's banquet, a diversion, something that fills up the chinks of one's time. How has this come about? The first and most obvious answer is that few value it because few experience it. And the possibility of going through life without the experience is rooted in that fact which separates friendship so sharply from both the other loves. Friendship is, in a sense not at all derogatory to it, the least natural of loves, the least instinctive, organic, biological, gregarious, and necessary. It has least commerce with our nerves. There is nothing throaty about it, nothing that quickens the pulse or turns you red and pale. It is essentially between individuals. The moment two men are friends, they have in some degree drawn apart from the herd. Without eros, none of us would have been begotten, and without affection, none of us would have been reared. But we can live and breed without friendship. The species, biologically considered, has no need of it. The pack or the herd, the community, may even dislike and distrust it. Its leaders very often do. Headmasters and headmistresses and heads of religious communities, colonels and ships' captains can feel uneasy when close and strong friendship arise between little knots of their subjects. This, so to call it, non-natural quality in friendship goes far to explain why it was exalted in ancient and medieval times and has come to be made light of in our own. The deepest and most permanent thought of those ages was ascetic and world-renouncing. Nature and emotion and the body were feared as dangers to our soul or despised as degradations of our human status. Inevitably, that sort of love was most prized which seemed most independent or even defiant of mere nature. Affection and eros were too obviously connected with our nerves, too obviously shared with the brutes. You could feel these tugging at your guts and fluttering in your diaphragm. But in friendship, in that luminous, tranquil, rational world of relationships freely chosen, you got away from all that. This alone, of all the loves, seemed to raise you to the levels of gods or angels. But then came romanticism and tearful comedy and the return to nature and the exaltation of sentiment, and in their train all that great wallow of emotion which, though often criticised, has lasted ever since. Finally, the exaltation of instinct, the dark gods in the blood, whose hierophants may be incapable of friendship. Under this new dispensation, all that had once commended this love now began to work against it. It had not tearful smiles and keepsakes and baby talk enough to please the sentimentalists. There was not blood and guts enough to attract the primitivists. It looked thin and etiolated, me either, a sort of vegetarian substitute for the more organic loves. Other causes have contributed. To those, and they are now the majority, who see human life merely as a development and complication of animal life, all forms of behaviour which cannot produce certificates of an animal origin and of survival value are suspect. Friendship certificates are not very satisfactory. Again, that outlook which values the collective above the individual necessarily disparages friendship. It is a relation between us at our highest level of individuality. It withdraws men from collective togetherness as surely as solitude itself could do, and more dangerously, for it withdraws them by twos and by threes. Some forms of democratic sentiment are naturally hostile to it because it is selective and an affair of the few. To say these are my friends implies those are not my friends. For all these reasons, if a man believes, as I do, that the old estimate of friendship was the correct one, he can hardly write a chapter on it except as a rehabilitation. This imposes on me at the outset a very tiresome bit of demolition. It has actually become necessary in our time to rebut the theory that every firm and serious friendship is really homosexual. He's speaking about male friends, not ladies, obviously. The dangerous word really is here important. To say that every friendship is consciously and explicitly homosexual would be too obviously false. The wiseacres take refuge in the less palpable charge that it is really, unconsciously, cryptically, in some Pickwickian sense, homosexual. And this, though it cannot be proved, can never, of course, be refuted. The fact that no positive evidence of homosexuality can be discovered in the behaviour of two friends does not disconcert the wiseacres at all. That, they say gravely, is just what we should expect. The very lack of evidence is thus treated as evidence. The absence of smoke proves that the fire is very carefully hidden. Yes, if it exists at all. But we must first prove its existence. Otherwise, we are arguing like a man who should say, if there were an invisible cat in that chair, the chair would look empty. But the chair does look empty. Therefore, there is an invisible cat upon it. A belief in invisible cats cannot perhaps be logically disproven, but it tells us a good deal about those who hold the view. Those who cannot conceive of friendship as a substantive love, but only as a disguise or elaboration of eros, betray the fact that they have never had a friend. The rest of us know that though we can have erotic love and friendship for the same person, yet in some ways, nothing is less like a friendship than a love affair. Lovers are always talking to one another about their love. Friends hardly ever about their friendship. Lovers are normally face to face, absorbed in one another. Friends are side by side, absorbed in some common interest. Above all, eros, whilst it lasts, is necessarily between two. But two, far from being the necessary number for friendship, is not even the best. And the reason for this is important. Lamb says somewhere that if of three friends, A, B, and C, A should die, then B loses not only A, but A's part in C, whilst C loses not only A, but A's part in B. In each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself, I am not large enough to call the whole man into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all of his facets. Now that Charles is dead, I shall never see again on Roland's reaction to a specifically Caroline joke. Far from having more of Roland, having him to myself now that Charles is away, I have less of Roland. Hence, true friendship is the least jealous of the loves. Two friends delight to be joined by a third, and three by a fourth, if only the newcomer is qualified to become a real friend. They can then say, as the blessed souls say in Dante, here comes one who will augment our loves. For in this love, to divide is not to take away. Of course, the scarcity of kindred souls, not to mention practical considerations about the size of rooms and the audibility of voices, sets limits to the enlargement of the circle. But within those limits, we possess each friend not less, but more, as the number of those with whom we share him increases. In this, friendship exhibits a glorious nearness by resemblance to heaven itself, where the very multitude of the blessed, which no man can number, increases the fruition which each has of God. For every soul, seeing him in her own way, doubtless communicates that unique vision to all the rest. That, says an old author, is why the seraphim in Isaiah's vision are crying, holy, 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 to one and other. And that's Isaiah 6:3, by the way. The more we thus share the heavenly bread between us, the more we shall all have. The homosexual theory, therefore, seems to me not even plausible. This is not to say that friendship and abnormal eros have never been combined. Certain cultures at certain periods seem to have tended to the contamination. In warlike societies, it was, I think, especially likely to creep into the relation between the mature brave and his young armour-bearer or squire. The absence of the woman, whilst you were on the warpath, had no doubt something to do with this. In deciding, if we think we need or can decide, where it crept in and where it did not, we must surely be guided by the evidence, when there is any, and not by an a priori theory. Kisses, tears, and embraces are not in themselves evidence of homosexuality. The implications would be, if nothing else, too comic. Hrothgar embracing Beowulf, Johnson embracing Boswell, a pretty flagrantly heterosexual couple, and all those hairy old toughs of centurions in Tacitus clinging to one another and begging for last kisses when the legion was broken up. All pansies. If you can believe that, you can believe anything. I love this. On a broad historical view, it is, of course, not the demonstrative gestures of friendship among our ancestors, but the absence of such gestures in our own society that calls for some special explanation. We, not they, are out of step. I have said that friendship is the least biological of our loves. Both the individual and the community can survive without it. But there is something else, often confused with friendship, which the community does need. Something which, though not friendship, is the matrix of friendship. In early communities, the cooperation of the males as hunters or fighters was no less necessary than the begetting and rearing of children. A tribe where there was no taste for the one would die no less surely than a tribe where there was no taste for the other. Long before history began, we men have got together apart from the women and done things. We had to. And to like doing what must be done is a characteristic that has survival value. We not only had to do the things, we had to talk about the things. We had to plan the hunt and the battle. When they were over, we had to hold a post-mortem and draw conclusions for future use. We liked this even better. We ridiculed or punished the cowards and the bunglers. We praised the star performers. We revelled in technicalities. He might have known he'd never get near the brute, not with the wind that way. Or, you see, I had a lighter arrowhead, that's what did it. What I always say is, stuck him just like that, see? Just the way I'm holding this stick. In fact, we talked shop. We enjoyed one another's society greatly. We braves, we hunters, all bound together by shared skill, shared dangers and hardships, esoteric jokes away from the women and the children. As some wag has said, Paleolithic man may or may not have had a club on his shoulder, but he certainly had a club of another sort. It was probably part of his religion, like that sacred smoking club where the savages in Melville's Typee were famously snug every evening of their lives. What were the women doing meanwhile? How should I know? I'm a man and never spied on the mysteries of the Bona Dea. They certainly often had rituals from which men were excluded. When, as sometimes happened, agriculture was in their hands, they must, like the men, have had common skills, toils, and triumphs. Yet perhaps their world was never as emphatically feminine as that of their menfolk was masculine. The children were with them, perhaps the old men were there too. But I am only guessing. I can trace the prehistory of friendship only in the male line. This pleasure in cooperation, in talking shop, in the mutual respect and understanding of men who daily see one another tested, is biologically valuable. You may, if you like, regard it as a product of the gregarious instinct. To me, that seems a roundabout way of getting at something which we all understand far better already than anyone has ever understood the word instinct. Something which is going on at this moment in dozens of wardrooms, bar rooms, common rooms, messes, and golf clubs. I prefer to call it companionship or clubbableness. This companionship is, however, only the matrix of friendship. It is often called friendship, and many people, when they speak of their friends, mean only their companions. But it is not friendship in the sense I give to the word. By saying this, I do not at all intend to disparage the mere clubbable relationship. We do not disparage silver by distinguishing it from gold. Friendship arises out of mere companionship when two or more of the companions discover that they have in common some insight or interest or even taste which the others do not share and which till that moment each believed to be his own unique treasure or burden. The typical expression of opening friendship would be something like, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." We can imagine that among those early hunters and warriors, single individuals, one in a century, one in 1,000 years, saw what others did not, saw that the deer was beautiful as well as edible, that hunting was fun as well as necessary, dreamed that his gods might be, not only powerful but holy. But as long as each of these percipient persons dies without finding a kindred soul, nothing, I suspect, will come of it. Art or sport or spiritual religion will not be born. It is when two such persons discover one another, when, whether with immense difficulties and semi-articulate bumblings, or with what would seem to us amazing and elliptical speed, they share their vision. It is then that friendship is born, and instantly they stand together in an immense solitude. Lovers seek for privacy. Friends find this solitude about them, this barrier between them and the herd, which whether they want it or not, they would be glad to reduce it. The first two would be glad to find a third. In our own time, friendship arises in the same way. For us, of course, the shared activity and therefore the companionship on which friendship supervenes will not often be a bodily one like hunting or fighting. It may be a common religion, common studies, a common profession, even a common recreation. All who share it will be our companions, but one or two or three who share something more will be our friends. In this kind of love, as Emerson said, "Do you love me?" means, do you see the same truth? Or at least, do you care about the same truth? The man who agrees with us that some question little regarded by others is of great importance can be our friend. He need not agree with us about the answer. Notice that friendship thus repeats on a more individual and less socially necessary level the character of the companionship which was its matrix. The companionship was between people who were doing something together, hunting, studying, painting, or what you will. The friends will still be doing something together, but something more inward, less widely shared and less easily defined. Still hunters, but of some immaterial quarry. Still collaborating, but in some work the world does not, or not yet, take account of. Still travelling companions, but on a different kind of journey. Hence we picture lovers' faces, hence we picture lovers face to face, but friends side by side, their eyes look ahead. That is why those pathetic people who simply want friends can never make any. The very condition of having friends is that we should want something else besides friends. Where the truthful answer to the question, "Do you see the same truth?" would be, "I see nothing, and I don't care about the truth. I only want a friend." No friendship can arise, though affection, of course, may. There would be nothing for the friendship to be about, and friendship must be about something, even if it were only an enthusiasm for dominoes or for white mice. Those who have nothing can share nothing. Those who are going nowhere can have no fellow travellers. When the two people who thus discover that they are on the same secret road are of different sexes, the friendship which arises between them will very easily may pass in the first half hour, into erotic love. Indeed, unless they are physically repulsive to each other, or unless one or both already loves elsewhere, it is almost certain to do so sooner or later. And conversely, erotic love may lead to friendship between the lovers. But this, so far from obliterating the distinction between the two loves, puts it in a clearer light. If one who was first in the deep and full sense your friend is then gradually or suddenly revealed as also your lover, you will certainly not want to share the beloved love with any third. But you will have no jealousy at all about sharing the friendship. Nothing so enriches an erotic love as the discovery that the beloved can deeply, truly, and spontaneously enter into friendship with the friends you already had. To feel that not only are we two united by erotic love, but we three or four or five are all travellers on the same quest, have all a common vision. The coexistence of friendship and eros may also help some moderns to realize that friendship is in reality a love, and even as great a love as eros. Suppose you are fortunate enough to have fallen in love with and married your friend. And now suppose it possible that you were offered the choice of two futures. Either you two will cease to be lovers, but remain forever joint seekers of the same God, the same beauty, the same truth, or else, losing all that, you will retain as long as you live the raptures and ardours, all the wonder and the wild desire of Eros. Choose which you please. Which would we choose? Which choice should we not regret after we had made it? I have stressed the unnecessary character of friendship, and this, of course, requires more justification than I have yet given it. It could be argued that friendships are of practical value to the community. Every civilized religion began in a small group of friends. Mathematics effectively began when a few Greek friends got together to talk about numbers and lines and angles. What is now the Royal Society was originally a few gentlemen meeting in their spare time to discuss things which they, and not many others, had a fancy for. What we now call the Romantic movement once was Mr. Wordsworth and Mr. Coleridge talking incessantly, at least Mr. Coleridge was, about a secret vision of their own. Communism, Tractarianism, Methodism, and the movement against slavery, the Reformation, the Renaissance might perhaps be said, without much exaggeration, to have begun in the same way. There is something in this, but nearly every reader would probably think some of these movements good for society and some bad. The whole list, if accepted, would tend to show at best that friendship is both a possible benefactor and a possible danger to the community. And even as a benefactor, it would have not so much survival value as what we may call civilization value. Would be something, in Aristotelian phrase, which helps the community not to live, but to live well. Survival value and civilization value coincide at some periods and in some circumstances, but not in all. What, at any rate, seems certain is that when friendship bears fruit which the community can use, it has to do so accidentally as a byproduct. Religions devised for a social purpose, like Roman emperor worship, or modern attempts to sell Christianity as a means of saving civilization, do not come to much. The little knots of friends who turn their backs on the world are those who really transform it. Egyptian and Babylonian mathematics were practical and social, pursued in the service of agriculture and magic. But the free Greek mathematics, pursued by friends as a leisurely occupation, have mattered to us more. Others again would say that friendship is extremely useful, perhaps necessary for survival to the individual. They could produce plenty of authority. Bear is back without brother behind it. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. But when we speak thus, we are using friend to mean ally. In ordinary usage, friend means or should mean more than that. A friend will, to be sure, prove himself to be also an ally when alliance becomes necessary, will lend or give when we are in need, will nurse us in sickness, will stand up for us among enemies, do what he can for our widows and our orphans. But such good offices are not the stuff of friendship. The occasions for them are almost interruptions. They are in one way relevant to it, in another not. Relevant because you would be a false friend if you would not do them when the need arose. Irrelevant because the role of benefactor always remains accidental, even a little alien to that of friend. It is almost embarrassing. For friendship is utterly free from affection's need to be needed. We are sorry that any gift or loan or night watching should have been necessary, and now, for heaven's sake, let us forget all about it and go back to the things we really want to do or talk of together. Even gratitude is no enrichment to this love. The stereotypes don't mention it. Here expresses what we really feel. The mark of perfect friendship is not that help will be given when the pinch comes, of course it will, but that having been given, it makes no difference at all. It was a distraction, an anomaly. It was a horrible waste of the time, always too short, that we had together. Perhaps we had only a couple of hours in which to talk, and God bless us, 20 minutes of it has had to be devoted to affairs. For of course we do not want to know our friends' affairs at all. Friendship, unlike Eros, is uninquisitive. You become a man's friend without knowing or caring whether he is married or single or how he earns his living. What of all these unconcerning things matters of fact to do with the real question? Do you see the same truth? In a circle of true friends, each man is simply what he is, stands for nothing but himself. No one cares twopence about anyone else's family, profession, class, income, race, or previous history. Of course, you will get to know about most of these in the end, but casually. They will come out bit by bit to furnish an illustration or an analogy to serve as pegs for an anecdote, never for their own sake. That is the kingliness of friendship. We meet like sovereign princes of independent states abroad on neutral ground, freed from our contexts. This love, essentially, ignores not only our physical bodies, but that whole embodiment which consists of our family, job, past, and connections. At home, besides being Peter or Jane, we also bear a general character: husband or wife, brother or sister, chief, colleague, or subordinate, not among our friends. It is an affair of disentangled or stripped minds. Eros will have naked bodies, friendship will have naked personalities. Hence, if you will not misunderstand me, the exquisite arbitrariness and irresponsibility of this love. I have no duty to be anyone's friend, and no man in the world has a duty to be mine. No claims, no shadow of necessity. Friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy, like art, like the universe itself, for God did not need to create. It has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things which give value to survival. I love Lewis. When I spoke of friends as side by side or shoulder to shoulder, I was pointing a necessary contrast between their posture and that of the lovers whom we picture face to face. Beyond that contrast, I do not want the image pressed. The common quest or vision which unites friends does not absorb them in such a way that they remain ignorant or oblivious of one another. On the contrary, it is the very medium in which their mutual love and knowledge exist. One knows nobody so well as one's fellow. Every step of the common journey tests his mettle. And the tests are tests we fully understand because we are undergoing them ourselves. Hence, as he rings true time after time, our reliance, our respect, and our admiration blossom into an appreciative love of a singularly robust and well-informed kind. If at the outset we had attended more to him and less to the thing our friendship is about, we should not have come to know or love him so well. You will not find the warrior, the poet, the philosopher, or the Christian by staring into his eyes as if he were your mistress. Better fight beside him, read with him, argue with him, pray with him. In a perfect friendship, this appreciative love is, I think, often so great and so firmly based that each member of the circle feels, in his heart of hearts, his secret heart, humbled, before all the rest. Sometimes he wonders what he is doing there among his betters. He is lucky beyond desert to be in such company, especially when the whole group is together, each bringing out all that is best, wisest, or funniest in all of the others. Those are the golden sessions when 4 or 5 of us, after a hard day's walking, have come to our inn or pub. When our slippers are on, our feet spread out toward the blaze and our drinks at our elbows. When the whole world, and something beyond the world, opens itself to our minds as we talk, and no one has any claim or any responsibility for another, but all are free men and equals, as if we had first met an hour ago, while at the same time an affection mellowed by the years enfolds us. Life, natural life, has no better gift to give. Who could have deserved it? From what has been said, it will be clear that in most societies, at most periods, friendships will be between men and women, or men and men, women and women. The sexes will have met one another in affection and in eros, but seldom in this love. For they will seldom have had with each other the companionship in common activities, which is the matrix of friendship. And this was certainly true at the time of Lewis' writing. Where men are educated and women are not. Shucks. Where one sex works and the other is idle, I'm going to choose to believe he means that women are grafters. Or where they do totally different work, they will usually have nothing to be friends about. But we can easily see that it is this lack, rather than anything in their essential natures, which excludes friendship. For where they can be companions, they can also be friends. Hence, in a profession like my own, where men and women work side by side, or in the mission field, or among authors and artists, such friendship is common. To be sure, what is offered as friendship on one side may be mistaken for eros on the other, with painful or embarrassing results. Or what begins as friendship in both may also become eros. But to say that something can be mistaken for or turn into something else is not to deny the difference between them. Rather, it implies we should not otherwise speak of turning into or being mistaken for. In one respect, our own society is unfortunate. A world where men and women never have common work or a common education can probably get along comfortably enough. In it, men turn to each other and only to each other for friendship, and they enjoy it very much. I hope the women enjoy their feminine friends equally. Again, a world where all men and women had sufficient common ground for this relationship could also be comfortable. At present, however, we fall between two stools. The necessary common ground, the matrix, exists between the sexes in some groups, but not in others. It is notably lacking in many residential suburbs. In a plutocratic neighbourhood where the men have spent their whole lives in acquiring money, some at least of the women have used their leisure to develop an intellectual life, have become musical or literary. In such places, the men appear among the women as barbarians among civilized people. In another neighbourhood, you will find the situation reversed. Both sexes have indeed been to school, but since then the men have had a much more serious education. They have become doctors, lawyers, clergymen, architects, engineers, or men of letters. The women are to them as children to adults. In neither neighbourhood is real friendship between the sexes at all probable. So he's speaking about like massive ends of this spectrum. But this, though, an impoverishment would be tolerable if it were admitted and accepted. The peculiar trouble of our own age is that men and women in this situation, haunted by rumours and glimpses of happier groups where no such chasm between the sexes exists, are bedevilled by the egalitarian idea that what is possible for some ought to be, and therefore is, possible to all, refuse to acquiesce in it. Hence, on the one hand, we get the wife as schoolmarm, the cultivated woman, who is always trying to bring her husband up to her level. She drags him to concerts and would like him to learn Morris dancing. And in, the Morris dancers. I do apologise. And invites cultivated people to the house. It often does surprisingly little harm. The middle-aged male has great powers of passive resistance. Sorry. Oh, God. Okay, give me a second. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Right. Come on, Kay. Come on, Kay. Game face, love. Come on. Okay. I'm so sorry, heartfelt sorry. The middle-aged male has great powers of passive resistance, and if she but knew of indulgence, women will have their fads. Something much more painful happens when it is the men who are civilized and the women not, and when all the women, and many of the men too, simply refuse to recognize the fact. When this happens, we get a kind, polite, laborious, and pitiful pretense. The women are deemed, as lawyers say, to be full members of the male circle. The fact, in itself not important, that they now smoke and drink like the men seems to simple-minded people a proof that they really are. No stag parties are allowed. Wherever the men meet, the women must come too. The men have learned to live among ideas. They know what discussion, proof, and illustration mean. A woman who has had merely school lessons and has abandoned soon after marriage whatever tinge of culture they gave her, whose reading is the women's magazines, and whose general conversation is almost wholly narrative, cannot really enter such a circle. She can be locally and physically present with it in the same room. What of that? If the men are ruthless, she sits bored and silent through a conversation which means nothing to her. Oh, fudge. If they are better bred, of course, they try to bring her in. Things are explained to her. People try to sublimate her irrelevant and blundering observations into some kind of sense. Oh, what princes. Sorry. But the efforts soon fail. And for manners' sake, what might have been a real discussion is deliberately diluted and peters out in gossip, anecdotes, and jokes. Her presence has thus destroyed the very thing she was brought to share. She can never really enter the circle, because the circle ceases to be itself when she enters it. As the horizon ceases to be the horizon when you get there, unless you believe in a flat earth. That's not Lewis, that's me. By learning to drink and smoke, gosh, and perhaps to tell risque stories, she has not, for this purpose, drawn an inch nearer to the men than her grandmother. But her grandmother was far happier and more realistic. She was at home talking real women's talk to other women, and perhaps doing so with great charm, sense, even wit. Can you imagine that? A witty woman who drinks and smokes and talks with the chaps. Oh, surely it's a myth. She herself might be able to do the same. She may be quite as clever as the men, whose evening she has spoiled, or cleverer, but she is not really interested in the same things, nor mistress of the same methods. We all appear as dunces when feigning an interest in things we care nothing about. The presence of such women, thousands strong, Lewis may add, helps to account for the modern disparagement of friendship. They are often completely victorious. They banish male companionship and therefore male friendship from whole neighbourhoods. In the only world they know, an endless prattling jolly replaces the intercourse of minds. All the men they meet talk like women while women are present. This victory over friendship is often unconscious. There is, however, a more militant type of woman who plans it. I have heard one say, never let two men sit together or they'll get talking about some subject and then there'll be no fun. Her point could not have been more accurately made. Talk, by all means. The more of it, the better. Unceasing cascades of the human voice, but not, please, a subject. The talk must not be about anything. This gay lady, he doesn't mean homosexual, this gay lady, this lively, accomplished, charming, unendurable bore, was seeking only each evening's amusement, making the meeting go. But the conscious war against friendship may be fought on a deeper level. There are women who regard it with hatred, envy, and fear as the enemy of eros and perhaps even more of affection. A woman of that sort has 100 arts to break up her husband's friendships. She will quarrel with his friends herself, or better still, with their wives. She will sneer, obstruct, and lie. She does not realize that the husband whom she succeeds in isolating from his own kind will not be very well worth having. She has emasculated him. She will grow to be ashamed of him herself. Nor does she remember how much of his life lies in places where she cannot watch him. Lucky for her, and lucky beyond her deserts, if there are not soon other secrets as well. We all know what he means. All these, of course, are silly women. The sensible women who, if they wanted, would certainly be able to qualify themselves for the world of discussion and ideas, are precisely those who, if they are not qualified, would never try to enter it or to destroy it. Amen, Lewis. They have other fish to fry. At a mixed party, they gravitate to one end of the room and, Lewis, you've killed it again, and talk women's talk to one another. Oh, Lewis. They don't want us for this sort of purpose any more than we want them. It is only the riffraff of each sex that, that wants to be incessantly hanging on the other. Live and let live. They laugh at us a good deal. That is just as it should be. Where the sexes, having no real shared activities, can meet only in affection and eros, cannot be friends, it is healthy that each should have a lively sense of the other's absurdity. Indeed, it is always healthy. No one ever really appreciated the other sex, just as no one really appreciates children or animals, without at times feeling them to be funny. For both sexes are. Humanity is tragicomical, but the division into sexes enables each to see in the other the joke that often escapes it in itself, and the pathos too. I gave warning that this would be largely a rehabilitation. The preceding words have, I hope, made clear why, to me at least, it seems no wonder if our ancestors regarded friendship as something that raised us almost above humanity. This love, free from instinct, free from all duties, but those which love has freely assumed, almost wholly free from jealousy, and free without qualification from the need to be needed, is eminently spiritual. It is the sort of love one can imagine between angels. Have we here found a natural love which is love itself? Before we rush to any such conclusion, let us beware of the ambiguity in the word spiritual. There are many New Testament contexts in which it means pertaining to the, in brackets, Holy Spirit. And in such contexts, the spiritual is by definition good. But when spiritual is used simply as the opposite of corporeal or instinctive or animal, this is not so. There is spiritual evil as well as spiritual good. There are unholy as well as holy angels. The worst sins of men are spiritual. We must not think that in finding friendship to be spiritual, we have found it to be in itself holy or inerrant. 3 significant facts remain to be taken into account. The first, already mentioned, is the distrust which authorities tend to have of close friendships among their subjects. It may be unjustified, or there may be some basis for it. Secondly, there is the attitude of the majority towards all circles of close friends. Every name they give such a circle is more or less derogatory. It is at best a set, lucky if not a coterie, a gang, a little senate, or a mutual admiration society. Those who in their own lives know only affection, companionship, and eros suspect friends to be stuck-up prigs who think themselves too good for us. Of course, this is the voice of envy, but envy always brings the truest charge, or the charge nearest to the truth, that she can think up. It hurts more. This charge, therefore, will have to be considered. Finally, thirdly, we must notice that friendship is very rarely the image under which Scripture represents the love between God and, man. It is not entirely neglected, but far more often seeking a symbol for the highest love of all. Scripture ignores this seemingly almost angelic relation and plunges into the depth of what is most natural and instinctive. Affection is taken as the image when God is presented as our Father. Eros, when Christ is represented as the bridegroom of the church. Let us begin with the suspicions of those in authority. I think there is a ground for them, and that a consideration of this ground brings something important to light. Friendship, I have said, is born at the moment when one man says to another, "What? You too? I thought that no one but myself." But the common taste or vision or point of view, which is thus discovered, need not always be a nice one. From such a moment, art or philosophy or an advance in religion or morals might well take their rise. But why not also torture, cannibalism, or human sacrifice? Surely most of us have experienced the ambivalent nature of such moments in our own youth. It was wonderful when we first met someone who cared for our favourite poet. What we had hardly understood before now took clear shape. What we had been half ashamed of, we now freely acknowledged. But it was no less delightful when we first met someone who shared with us a secret evil. This too became far more palpable and explicit. Of this too we ceased to be as ashamed. Even now, at whatever age, we all know the perilous charm of a shared hatred or grievance. It's difficult not to hail as a friend the only other man in college who really sees the faults of the sub-warden. Alone among unsympathetic companions, I hold certain views and standards timidly, half ashamed to avow them and half doubtful if they can, after all, be right. Put me back among my friends, and in half an hour, in 10 minutes, these same views and standards become once more indisputable. The opinions of this little circle, while I am in it, outweigh that of 1,000 outsiders. As friendship strengthens, it will do this even when my friends are far away. For we all wish to be judged by our peers, by the men after our own heart. Only they really know our mind, and only they judge it by standards we fully acknowledge. Theirs is the praise we really covet and the blame we really dread. The little pockets of early Christians survived because they cared exclusively for the love of the brethren, and stops their ears to the opinions of the pagan society all around them. But a circle of criminals, cranks, or perverts survives in just the same way, by becoming deaf to the opinions of the outer world, by discounting it as the chatter of outsiders who don't understand, of the conventional, the bourgeois, the establishment, of prigs, prudes, and humbugs. It is therefore easy to see why authority frowns on friendship. Every real friendship is a sort of secession, even a rebellion. It may be a rebellion of serious thinkers against accepted claptrap, or of faddists against accepted good sense, of real artists against popular ugliness, or of charlatans against civilized taste, of good men against the badness of society, or of bad men against the goodness. Whichever it is, it will be unwelcome to top people. In each knot of friends, there is a sectional public opinion, which fortifies its members against the public opinion of the community in general. Each, therefore, is a pocket of potential resistance. Men who have real friends are less easy to manage or to get at, harder for good authorities to correct or for bad authorities to corrupt. Hence, if our masters, by force or by propaganda about togetherness, or by unobtrusively making privacy and unplanned leisure impossible, ever succeed in producing a world where all are companions and none are friends, they will have removed certain dangers and will also have taken from us what is almost our strongest safeguard against complete servitude. But the dangers are perfectly real. Friendship, as the ancients saw, can be a school of virtue, but also, as they did not see, a school of vice. It is ambivalent. It makes good men better and bad men worse. It would be a waste of time to elaborate the point. What concerns us is not to expatiate on the badness of bad friendships, but to become aware of the possible dangers in good ones. This love, like the other natural loves, has its congenital liability to a particular disease. It will be obvious that the element of secession, of indifference or deafness, at least on some matters, to the voices of the outer world is common to all friendships, whether good, bad, or merely innocuous. Even if the common ground of the friendship is nothing more momentous than stamp collecting, the circle rightly and inevitably ignores the views of the millions who think stamp collecting a silly occupation, and of thousands who have merely dabbled in it. The founders of meteorology rightly and inevitably ignored the views of the millions who still attributed storms to witchcraft. There is no offence in this, as I know that I should be an outsider to a circle of golfers, mathematicians, or motorists. So I claim the equal right of regarding them as outsiders to mine. People who bore one another should meet seldom. People who interest one another should meet often. The danger is that this partial indifference or deafness to outside opinion, justified and necessary though it is, may lead to a wholesale indifference or deafness. The most spectacular instances of this can be seen not in a circle of friends, but in a theocratic or aristocratic class. We know what the priests in our Lord's time thought of the common people. The knights in Froissart's chronicles had neither sympathy nor mercy for the outsiders, the churls, or the peasantry. But this deplorable indifference was very closely intertwined with a good quality. They really had, among themselves, honour, a very high standard of valour, generosity, and courtesy. This standard the cautious, close-fisted churl would have thought merely silly. The knights, in maintaining it, were and had to be wholly indifferent to his views. They didn't give a damn what he thought. If they had, our own standard today would be poorer and the coarser for it. But the habit of not giving a damn grows on a class. To discount the voice of the peasant, where it really ought to be discounted, makes it easier to discount his voice when he cries for justice or mercy. The partial deafness, which is noble and necessary, encourages the wholesale deafness, which is arrogant and inhuman. A circle of friends cannot, of course, oppress the outer world as a powerful social class can, but it is subject on its own scale to the same danger. It can come to treat as outsiders in a general and derogatory sense those who are quite properly outsiders for a particular purpose. Excuse me. Thus, like an aristocracy, it can create around it a vacuum across which no voice will carry. The literary or artistic circle, which began by discounting, perhaps rightly, the plain man's ideas about literature or art, may come to discount equally his idea that they should pay their bills, cut their nails, and behave civilly. Whatever faults the circle has, and no circle is without them, thus become incurable. But that is not all. The partial and defensible deafness was based on some kind of superiority, even if it were only a superior knowledge about stamps. The sense of superiority will then get itself attached to the total deafness, you see. The group will disdain as well as ignore those outside of it. It will, in effect, have turned itself into something very much like a class. A coterie is a self-appointed aristocracy. I said above that in all good friendships, each member often feels humility toward the rest. He sees that they are splendid and counts himself lucky to be among them. But unfortunately, the they and them are also, from another point of view, we and us. Thus, the transition from individual humility to corporate pride is very easy. I am not thinking of what we should call a social or snobbish pride, a delight in knowing and being known to know distinguished people. That is quite a different thing. The snob wishes to attach himself to some group because it is already regarded as an elite. Friends are in danger of coming to regard themselves as an elite because they are already attached. We seek men after our own heart for their own sake, and are then alarmingly or delightfully surprised by the feeling that we have become an aristocracy. Not that we'd call it that. Everyone who has known friendship will probably feel inclined to deny with some heat that his own circle was ever guilty of such an absurdity. I feel the same way. But in such matters, it is best not to begin with ourselves, however it may be with us. I think we have all recognized some such tendency in those other circles to which we are outsiders. I was once at some kind of conference where two clergymen, obviously close friends, began talking about uncreated energies other than God. I asked how there could be any uncreated things except God if the creed was right in calling him the maker of all things visible and I skipped into my translation. Sorry. I asked how could there be any uncreated things except God if the creed was right in calling him the maker of all things visible and invisible. Their reply was to glance at one another and to laugh. I had no objection to their laughter, but I wanted an answer in words as well. It was not at all a sneering or unpleasant laugh. It expressed very much what Americans would express by saying, "Isn't he cute?" It was like the laughter of jolly grown-ups when an enfant terrible asks the sort of question that is never asked. You could hardly imagine how inoffensively it was done, nor how clearly it conveyed the impression that they were fully aware of living habitually on a higher plane than the rest of us, that they came among us as knights among Charles or as grown-ups among children. Very possibly they had an answer to my question and knew that I was too ignorant to follow it. If they had said in so many words, I'm afraid it would take too long to explain. I would not be attributing to them the pride of friendship. The glance and the laugh are the real point, the audible and the visible embodiment of a corporate superiority taken for granted and unconcealed. This sense of corporate superiority is not always Olympian. That is tranquil and tolerant. It may be titanic, restive, militant, and embittered. Sorry. I'm just skipping forward because those two anecdotes are, yeah, okay. We can thus detect the pride of friendship, Olympian, titanic, or just merely vulgar, in many circles of friends. It would be rash to assume that our own is safe from this danger, for of course it is in our own that we should be slowest to recognise it. The danger of such pride is indeed almost inseparable from friendly love. Friendship must exclude, from the innocent and necessary act of excluding to the spirit of exclusiveness is an easy step, and thence to the degrading pleasure of exclusiveness. If that is once admitted the downward slope, we will grow rapidly steeper. We may never perhaps become titans or just cads. We might, which is in some way worse, become souls. The common vision which first brought us together may fade quite away. We shall be a coterie that exists for the sake of being a coterie, a little self-elected and therefore absurd aristocracy, basking in the moonshine of our collective self-approval. Sometimes a circle in this condition begins to dabble in the world of practice, judiciously enlarging itself to admit recruits whose share in the original common interest is negligible, who are felt to be in some undefined sense sound men. It becomes a power in the land. Sorry, a book cram. Membership of it comes to have a sort of political importance, though the politics involved may be only those of a regiment, a college, or a cathedral. Close. I just lost my place. I'm so sorry. The manipulation of committees, the capture of jobs for sound men, and the united front against the have-nots now become its principal occupation, and those who once met to talk about God or poetry now meet to talk about lectureships or livings. Notice the justice of their doom. Dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return, said God to Adam. In a circle which has thus dwindled into a coven of wranglers, friendship has sunk back again into the mere practical companionship which was its matrix. The mass of the people who are never quite right are never quite wrong. They are hopelessly mistaken in their belief that every knot of friends came into existence for the sake of the pleasures or of conceit and superiority. They are, I trust, mistaken in their belief that every friendship actually indulges in these pleasures. But they would seem to be right in diagnosing pride as the danger to which friendships are naturally liable. Just because this is the most spiritual of loves, the danger which besets it is spiritual too. Friendship is even, if you like, angelic. But man needs to be triply protected by humility if he is to eat the bread of angels without risk. Perhaps we may now hazard a guess why Scripture uses friendship so rarely as an image of the highest love. It is already, in actual fact, too spiritual to be a good symbol of spiritual things. The highest does not stand without the lowest. God can safely represent himself to us as father and husband, because only a lunatic would think that he is physically our sire, or that his marriage with the church is other than mystical. But if friendship were used for this purpose, we might mistake the symbol for the thing symbolized. The danger inherent in it would be aggravated. We might be further encouraged to mistake that nearness by resemblance to the heavenly life which friendship certainly displays for a nearness of approach. Friendship, then, like the other natural loves, is unable to save itself. In reality, because it is spiritual and therefore faces a subtler enemy, it must, even more wholeheartedly than they, invoke the divine protection if it hopes to remain sweet. For consider how narrow its true path is. It must not become what the people call a mutual admiration society. Yet, if it is not full of mutual admiration, of appreciative love, it is not a friendship at all. For unless our lives are to be miserably impoverished, it must be for us in our friendships as it was for Christiana in her party in the Pilgrim's Progress. They seemed to be a terror one to the other, for that they could not see that glory each one on herself, which they could see in each other. Now, therefore, they began to esteem each other better than themselves. For you are fairer than I am, said one, and you are more comely than I, said another. There is in the long run only one way in which we can taste this illustrious experience with safety, and Bunyan has indicated it in the same passage. It was in the house of the interpreter, after they had been bathed, sealed, and freshly clothed in white raiment, that the women saw one another in this light. If we remember the bathing, sealing, and robing, we shall be safe. And the higher the common ground of the friendship, the more necessary this remembrance. In an explicitly religious friendship, above all, to forget it would be fatal. For then it will seem to us that we 4 or 5, have chosen one another, the insight of each finding the intrinsic beauty of the rest. Like to like, an involuntary nobility, that we have ascended above the rest of mankind by our native powers. The other loves do not invite the same illusion. Affection obviously requires kingships, or at least proximities, which never depended on our own choice. And as for Eros, half the love songs and half the love poems in the world will tell you that the beloved is your fate or destiny, no more than your choice than a thunderbolt, for it is not in our power to love or to hate. I think I'm near the end. Cupid's archery, genes, anything but ourselves. But in friendship, being free of all that, we think we have chosen our peers. In reality, a few years' difference in the dates of our birth, a few more miles between certain houses, the choice of one university instead of another, posting to different regiments, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at a first meeting, any of these chances might have kept us apart. But for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. I love this. A secret master of the ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you," can truly say to every group of Christian friends, "You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another." The friendship is not a reward for our discrimination and good taste in finding one another out. It is the instrument by which God reveals to each the beauties of the other. They are no greater than the beauties of 1,000 others. By friendship, God opens our eyes to them. They are, like all beauties, derived from him, and then, in a good friendship, increased by him through the friendship itself, so that it is his instrument for creating as well as for revealing. At this feast, it is he who has spread the board, and it is he who has chosen the guests. It is he, we may dare to hope, who sometimes does and always should preside. Let us not reckon without our host. Not that we must almost always partake of it solemnly. God, who made good laughter, forbid. It is one of the most difficult and delightful subtleties of life that we must deeply acknowledge certain things to be serious, and yet retain the power and the will to treat them often as lightly as a game. But there will be a time for saying more about this in the future. For the moment, I will only quote Dunbar's beautifully balanced advice. Man, please thy Maker and be merry, and give not for this world a cherry.